The Department of Justice will stand up an interagency fraud enforcement task force to collaborate with agencies on investigation into fraud through COVID-19 relief from the American Rescue Plan. That's in addition to the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee and the Office of the Special Inspector General for Pandemic Recovery. Robert Shea is National Managing Principal for Public Policy at Grant Thornton. He's former Associate Director at the Office of Management and Budget, and he's a Napa Fellow. Robert, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. I also understand you were a commissioner on the Commission on Evidence-Based Policymaking. I imagine in that role, you have a concern about all of the data that's going to be coming into all of these pandemic oversight offices and potentially going a bunch of different directions, not necessarily all in the same direction. What do you make of the creation of this new Justice Department task force?
Well, I think it adds to the oversight that the government's already created for pandemic oversight. It's important to remember oversight flows from Congress. And Congress has set up a number of entities to ensure that money is not wasted and the taxpayers' interests are protected. They've got House and Senate oversight committees and a government and accountability office. Those are congressional entities, but they've also set up inspectors general, a huge ecosystem of auditors and investigators across the government, all of whom are adding to oversight of the pandemic. But Congress, in its wisdom, knowing it was passing trillion-dollar bill after trillion-dollar bill, set up additional entities. They set up its own select subcommittee on the coronavirus crisis. The CARES Act established a special congressional commission on the pandemic, and then they set up the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, the PRAC. Now, the PRAC is supposed to combine its resources with other IGs to minimize waste, fraud, and abuse in pandemic response programs. The Treasury Inspectors General for Pandemic Recovery is another entity created by the CARES Act. And now the Biden administration has created a pandemic relief czar, and now this special justice fraud unit. It's just another addition to an enormous panoply of pandemic oversight.
How does one tell who has jurisdiction over what, or is that still unclear at this point, Robert?
I think, in answer to the question, who's in charge, I think everyone. And it'll be incumbent on this new pandemic relief czar to bring all of this together. You've seen a number of squabbles about jurisdiction. The Special Inspector General for Pandemic Recovery at Treasury tried to articulate his point of view of jurisdictional boundaries, and that ran afoul of both the PRAC and the Government Accountability Office. I've not seen such firm language out of GAO. As you know, they tend to express their views softly, but in this case, they were very firm to the Treasury Inspector General not to inform it where its jurisdictional boundaries lay. I don't think it's not yet clear who's in charge. Congress is in charge, but they've set up a number of dueling entities that I think sets itself up for some potential overlap, duplication, inefficiency. Like I say, this new pandemic recovery czar could possibly bring order to the chaos.
It sounds to me, though, like the challenge here potentially is philosophical rather than logistical, Robert. And the reason I say that is, you said a moment ago, oversight flows from Congress. I imagine at least some of the overseers that are located in the executive branch and report up the chain in the executive branch would beg to argue with you on that subject. Now, I'm not here to say who's right and who's wrong, but that difference of opinion seems to be the crux of the jurisdictional issue. Is that a fair observation on my part, or did I miss something?
No, I think there's wisdom in what you say. The Inspector General has this dual reporting requirement. They report both to Congress and the agency head, and therefore they're set up as quasi-independent entities. There's the old saying: if you know one IG, you know one IG. They're all unique and have different views about where they ought to focus their energies. But exercising that collaboration muscle is going to be really important if we're going to take the limited oversight dollars we have and focus them where they need to go to really minimize the waste of taxpayer dollars.
All right, we just have a couple of minutes left, Robert. I appreciate the comment that there is wisdom in what I said. You didn't say how much, so I'm not going to get overly excited about that. One of the things in President Biden's executive order in his memo is the launching of an initiative on identity theft prevention and public benefits. That oversight czar that you mentioned will run that in coordination with the Office of Management and Budget. What would you like to see come out of that, and where does that fit in the mosaic of everything that you laid out that the executive branch and Congress is putting together here?
Well, I think the creation of the unit is recognition that a lot of programs and people have been taken advantage of as a result of a lot of new programs with lots of money being stood up almost overnight. The government has all the data it needs to verify one's identity, but often those data sources are in disparate places across the government, and OMB is a good entity to reduce barriers to sharing that data, bringing it together to improve identity verification, which is required for eligibility verification and to ensure that we're getting money to the right people. But it could also avail itself of private sector expertise, fraud, reduction and identification, and identity verification practices in the private sector are improving on a daily basis. And so leveraging those best practices, I think, could really serve well all the effort to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse.
Robert Shea, thanks very much as always.
Thanks for having me, Francis.